What's up, y'all? Welcome to the video. Today I'll be showing you the next steps for making our survival shooter, which is going to involve putting together our FPS controller with the assets that we imported, as well as some custom functionality that we're going to need. If you haven't watched the first video, I highly recommend you go check it out, because in there we did our initial project setup, imported most of the assets that we're going to be using, and updated our build file with C++ modules that we're going to need for our implementations. So since last time, I went ahead and imported all of the animations for our FPS arms. So we are going to be utilizing an idle animation, a reload animation, a shooting animation, and a walking animation. Now, later in this video, we're going to be setting up the animations, but I went ahead earlier and re-imported them. And I also went and added a map. So as you can see here, this is more or less an edited version of the demo streets level that the asset pack gave us, but I wanted to open it up a little bit more so that we could focus more on having our wave-based combat in an open area for us to play. Okay, so getting into our controller setup, the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make some blueprint versions of some C++ classes here. So first off, we're going to start with our survival FPS character. If you right click here and you go to create blueprint class based on survival FPS character, it is now going to make a blueprintable version of our C++ implementation. So we're just going to call this BP underscore FPS controller. And we're going to go put that in our survival FPS blueprints folder. And here we have our blueprint. Now, the reason we are doing this is because when we make it a blueprint, we still have control over the C++ implementation, but now if we go into our blueprint, we can actually access the data in different values that are going into our controller for easy access. So first thing first, we're going to edit the skeletal mesh, and we're going to get our FPS arms. And we're first going to change some of these values here so that it has the right orientation. This would be 20, 0. Let's see how this works. And in order to get this to show, we're actually going to have to apply this controller to our main game mode. So we're going to go back to our classes again, and we're going to go to Survival FPS Game Mode, and we're going to create a blueprint version of that as well. So BP underscore FPS Game Mode. I'll put that in our blueprints here. And now going into this, we can now edit our default pawn, and we're going to make that the controller that we just made. Once you've done that, in order to get it to work, we're going to have to go to our project settings, go to maps and modes, and we're going to select our default game mode to be our BP survival FPS game mode. And if we hit play, now we can see our FPS arms as such. And now we can get into adding more implementations and features for our controller. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to set up our animations. And what we're going to do for that is we are going to go into our assets, FPS arms, animations, and we are going to create a new animation blueprint. We're going to be using our FPS arms skeleton. And I'm just going to call this BP FPS arms anims. If we go into here, as you can see, we have a whole lot of nothing. So we are going to make a new state machine. and connect that to the output pose. Now this state machine right here is actually where we're going to handle all of our different player states, so idle, walking, etc. So the first thing we're going to do is from entry, we're going to make a new state. I'm just going to call that idle. And if we go into here, we can actually drag in our idle animation. If we put that connected to there, compile and save. Now we see that we have our idle animation set up. And real quick, if we go to play, why isn't that working? Oh, right, because I need to hook up the blueprint to our controller. So if we go right here to animation, to our anim class. Now we can see our idle animation is working. So this is great and all, but we want to be able to see the walking animation while we're walking and then not while we're idle. So how we're going to do that is we're going to go back into our blueprint. In our state machine, we're going to make a transition to a new state. And we're going to call this walking. I'll connect those because they can go both ways. And in here, we can actually manage the transitional conditions in order to go from walking to idle and vice versa. But in order to actually do this, we're going to have to make a Boolean value that we're going to be checking every time to actually see if they are walking or idle. So what we're going to do here is we're going to make a variable. We're going to call this is moving. I'll save that. And if we go into our event graph, we can now mess around with this variable right here. So first thing, we're going to want to make sure that the pawn owner is valid. So it is valid. And if it is, we're going to want to set our is moving to a value that we're about to get right now. So first off, we're going to want to get our pawn's velocity. And then from there, we're going to want to get the vector length. And if that vector length is greater than 0, then we are moving. So with that, we're going to go back to our state machine over here, and we're going to add these transitions. So if we do want them walking, they need to be moving. And if we don't want them walking, they're idle, then they are not moving. And in our walking state, we want to make sure that we add the output pose as well. And that'll be in assets, animations, walk. Okay, and with that, we'll see here, and we should be able to walk. And as you can see, we now have our walking animation, and if we stop, we go straight back into our idle animation. Okay, next what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make our setup for shooting and reloading. Now, rather than making a bunch of states for this, we're actually just going to make these montages because every time we're going to either reload or shoot, we're just going to be triggering the event rather than checking a bunch of states. So once that montage is done, it'll go right back into its normal state machine. So in order to actually get montages to work, we're going to go into our anim graph. And right in between our state machine, we're going to have to add a default slot. And adding this is what will allow us to utilize our montages. Now to create these montages, we're going to right-click our reload, for example. Go to the top here, go to create. I'm going to create anim montage. And we'll just leave the name as is. FPS arms reload montage. And as you can see here, we have that working. And then we're going to do the same for our shooting. And now we have that all set up. Okay, so now that we have our animation blueprint working, we're now going to want to add a way for us to trigger our montages. So what we're going to do now is we are going to go into our C++ code, into our character file. And if we go into our character.h file, or header, we can now pass in some references to our montages. So how we're going to do that is, well, first let's comment reload montage. We're also going to add our shooting montage. In order to make this visible through our blueprints, we're going to want to make U property. And this is going to be edit anywhere, blueprint read write. This right here is what's going to allow us to actually pass in our montage into the controller from the data blueprint. And then we're also going to want to add this into the animation category. And then right below it, I'm going to say anim montage, and we're going to make that a pointer. And this is going to be a member variable, member pointer reload montage. And we'll do the same for our shooting montage. There we go. And if we go back into the engine, we're going to have to recompile our code. So the way you can do that is through live coding. So if you go right down here and hit the recompile button, as you can see, we are now compiling our updated code, and it looks like it was successful. So we're now going to go back into our controller blueprint. And now we can see we can add these montages. So we're now going to pass in our reload montage and our shooting montage. Okay, cool. Now going back into our code, we're now going to want to have to, of course, trigger this montage. So how are we going to do that? So for our reloading, we're actually going to make a new method. I'm just going to call this void reload. And we are going to add a definition to that. Perfect. If we go into our CPP, we can now add in here what we want to do with that. So first off, we're going to want to get the anim instance, which is going to be anim instance pointer anim instance. This is going to be equal to our mesh 1p, and then we can get the anim instance from here. Now, before doing Now, before playing our montage, we're going to want to make sure that our anim instance is not null. And then we can go ahead and play our montage. So we're going to take our p anim instance, to run montage play, and we're now going to pass in p reload montage. We're going to play that at normal speed. Now, that is the method for playing our montage. So now how do we actually trigger this with our input? Well, if we go up here into our input component, we can actually bind our input events to this. So we're going to add a new binding, bind reload event. And if we go to player input component, bind action, we're going to name this reload, i.e. pressed this, and we're then going to get a reference to our method. Oops. And there we go. Now, theoretically, this should work, right? Well, before we actually allow that to work, of course, we're going to want to recompile. But we also need to bind the reload action to a key. So how we're going to do that is we're going to go to our project settings, and we're going to go down into input. And then if we add a new action mapping, and we're going to name this reload, and then type in R. We're going to bind this to the R key, so just like so. And now, if we play this and press R, now our reload animation plays. Okay. Now that that is working, we're going to want to do the same thing for our shooting. However, there is already an action attached to our firing event. So all we have to do is go down into this and just attach our shooting animation to it, or our shooting montage. So while we are shooting too, we are going to actually have it interrupt our reload montage. So in order to do that, we are going to first get our anim instance. So instance to get mesh 1p, get anim instance, and this is not null. Now we can work with this. So we're going to interrupt reload montage, and then we're going to play our shooting montage. So first, to interrupt the reload montage, we're going to want to do p anim instance montage stop. I'm going to pass in this value right here, and then we're interrupting the reload montage. And I need to learn how to spell. Okay. And then from there, we can play our shooting montage. And we're going to do that at normal speeds. Okay. So if we compile that, we should now be able to play our shooting animation. And there we go. And if we hit reload, press this, it now interrupts our reloading montage. Oh, and also something that we should be doing here is we should be making sure that reload montage and shoot montage are also not null. So just so we're not making the engine crash on us, if np reload montage equal to one pointer, and we'll do the same up here for our reload. Save that. Perfect. I'll go and compile that. Okay, so the last thing we're going to want to do for our controller setup is we're going to want to make a way for us to equip or bind certain weapons to our player. So just for an example, for this video, we're going to make a weapon class later, but we're just going to bind our the default blueprint rifle to us. So if we go into our code and go right over here, we're going to make a new method and call this equip weapon. And with this, we're going to be getting a class reference up here of our weapon. Reference to weapon. It's going to be a U property. Edit anywhere. Blueprint read write. Category is going to be equal to weapon. And we're going to add a meta tag as well. And that's going to be allow private access is equal to true. And there, we're going to get a T subclass of class A actor. And we're going to call this M underscore class pistol, since we are going to be passing in our pistol at some point. Now that we have this reference to our class that we can assign via blueprints, we can now equip that in our equip method. So I'm going to add a definition here for that. And first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to get our spawn parameters. So where are we spawning the actor? What's the rotation of it, etc. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to get a player controller P. I'm going to call this P controller. It's equal to cast of a player controller. I'm just going to get the controller. And now const f rotator, so we'll be getting our rotation, which calls p rotation, equal to our p controller player camera manager, and we're going to get our camera rotation. And then this next one, we're going to get our location. Location P location. Oops, that's not an F location, it's an F vector. Location. It's going to be equal to our get owner, get actor location. And then lastly, we're going to want to add another parameter, and that is going to be our F actor spawn parameters. I'll call this P spawn params. And then we're going to set our P spawn params dot spawn collision handling override. It's going to be equal to our E spawn actor collision handling method always spawn. So regardless of what is happening with collisions, as soon as it spawns, it is always going to spawn regardless. And so with these, we're going to go ahead and spawn our actor. So I'm going to want to a actor, and we're just going to call this P pistol. It's not going to be a pistol right now, we're just passing in our rifle at first, but it will be our pistol. And we're going to get world spawn actor, and we're going to pass in our pistol class, our P location, P rotation, and our P spawn params. And why is that complaining? Oh, right. It is a templated. There we go. And now if we go back and compile this, right, and if we go back and compile this, and we go into our controller, and we look up weapon. We can now pass in our BP rifle as the class. And what this is going to do is it is going to, or at least it should, spawn the rifle. And we are also going to want to equip the weapon on play. So as you can see, our rifle is now spawned. Okay, now that we have our weapon being spawned into the world, we're going to want to instantly attach it to our player. So in order to do that, first we're going to want to go up here and add an include of our TP weapon component. And we're going to go back down here, and UTP weapon component P weapon, we'll just call it that. And we're actually going to do P pistol get component by class. We're going to pass in UTP weapon component. Static class. And we are going to cast this to a UTP weapon component. And once we have our weapon component, we can go and attach weapon. And just looking for the target character, which is this. So now if we go back and just making sure we have our reference to BP rifle in here. And we do. Now if we go in, now our weapon is automatically attached. Now you may notice that it is, yep, it's all up in your face. So in order to fix that, we're going to have to add a socket to our skeleton. To do that, we're going to go into our assets, FPS arms, go into source, and we're going to go into the skeleton right here. And if we go on to the left over here, we're going to add a socket to the right palm. No, we're going to add it to the wrist. So if you right click that and go to add socket, we're going to call this weapon socket. If we can rename it. Here we go. Weapon socket. And the preview animation we're going to want is the idle animation. And our preview asset is actually going to be the pistol. And now we can then add the socket params to fit for our pistol. And this is going to make the rifle still look a little bit off, but we are making this game to work around our assets anyways. So if we go here, looks good. A little bit there. I'm going to adjust this a little bit more. And that should be pretty good. So now if we're going to go and save this. Now, how do we attach it to this particular socket, you may ask? So we're actually going to go into our TP weapon component. And down in the attach weapon method, you'll see this fname grip point. This is actually the socket name that it's passing in. So we are just going to change this to weapon socket. And if we go back, compile our changes, and we hit play, now our rifle is in the right socket. Okay, so at this point we have our custom FPS controller working with custom animations, as well as a way for us to attach our weapons to the player. In the next video, we're going to cover the shooting mechanic, and in there we'll be writing up our weapon class, as well as making edits to our weapon component to use line tracing instead of the default ball projectile. As always, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and comment. I'll see you in the next video.